Good morning. We have lots of space up front here. Clay didn't invite last time, so I'm sure he won't this time. Come on in, find a seat. There's spots up here, lots of spots. All right, good morning. Keep making your way to seats. If those of you who have some extra spots near you can kind of flag those that are still searching for that spot for the morning. She's flagging down here, front and center. Well, welcome. We are having our second district staff development for secondary folks this year, and we've invited Dr. Clay Cook back to join us and continue our discussion about creating responsive, nurturing environments for our students and for us as well. So thank you for coming in this morning and we're going to be here until 11 o'clock this morning, and then you'll be back in your buildings with some professional development opportunities there. A lot has happened since we last gathered. It was August 29th when we got together. The year hadn't started yet. So maybe we were eager to begin getting our classrooms ready. And then our students arrived, some of them ready to learn, others not ready to learn so much that it was a little scary. So You've been working really hard, and every day is a new challenge. My computer fell asleep again. And so we want to take a chance to pause and kind of re-engage with what we learned from Dr. Cook last time. And we're going to spend our morning talking again, still based on our strategic plan, about how we will cultivate an innovative environment where all members of our community support a culture that is committed to embracing exceptional opportunities for all learners. So we're still headed in this direction, and we want to hone some of the things that we talked to you about previously. And then we are going to, so in order to do that, we're going to take a deeper dive into the proactive classroom management strategies that he talked with us all about and how we're implementing those in a daily practice. But we really want you to make sure that you have a solid understanding in what those are and how do you do those. We're also going to talk about EMR, which is a concept that stands for Establish, Maintain, and Restore. So this is about applying concrete relationship practices. This is between you and students, between you and your colleagues. And then many of you, how many of you have had an Ed Services team member come out to your building and talk about social and emotional learning, or SEL? Okay. So some of you, I know we're going to be here at Elk River High School today talking more about that, and some of you still have this yet to come in the days and weeks ahead. And we want those of you who have started that process, we want you to have an opportunity to kind of reflect on where you're at. For the rest of you, you will have an opportunity to continue to understand the importance of social and emotional learning curriculum. So thank you for being here. I want to invite you all to take a little sigh, deep breath in and a breath out. You guys have all earned that sigh. I know it's been a long 3 months. You'll earn many more as this year goes on. We passed a referendum. Yay. So we have a lot of good things to look forward to, but we all know that every day that we do this work that there are a lot of challenges that come our way. So our idea behind today is helping you to do that in the best way that you can. So in order to make our learning and our time here complete and that you can maximize, we always have some protocols. So we're going to begin and end on time. We want to maintain a student-centered focus. Remember, this is why we're here. This is for our students. Be brave, take risks, ask questions, engage yourself in the process so that you can get the most out of it. I want you to be here now. I asked you all to bring devices, but just keep those closed until we need to use them, and we will be referring to some documents in there. Take care of yourself. Bathrooms are right out back. Do what you need to do. Some of us, along with those learners coming into our classrooms, got the sniffles too, so do what you need to do and then engage fully in the learning. So to kind of reinforce some of this, I have a video about a bad audience and a good audience, and I'm hoping that we can choose to be a good audience. So here you have it. Alrighty, just some reminders for you there. And then just to ground us back into how does this all tie into the work that we're all doing. This is a part of our MTSS framework. So what we're going to talk about here today is really based on our Tier 1 core instruction. And so some things that are included in that we'll hear more about: SEL curriculum. It's really important that every student in our system is exposed to the skills that they need to be socially and emotionally adapted. Positive behavior intervention supports, which we spent some time talking about, and all of you are in different phases of implementing in your buildings. That's a Tier 1 support that falls into our behavior MTSS framework. And then you're going to hear more about proactive classroom management strategies. If you think back to when you had your sheet in front of you last August, you were working on filling out what fits into this diamond here. Another example is restorative practice. We aren't necessarily doing this systemically yet, but many of you are, there's lots of seeds that are getting planted. So these are the kind of things that we're looking for in Tier 1. And then having Dr. Cook work with us. Again, we're happy to have him back. We're glad he made his way up to Elk River before the deer hunting traffic gets underway. And he has to get out of town, but we're lucky that he's here, right here at the University of Minnesota. Many of you have met him before, so I won't go through his entire bio, but we will continue. What I think is important, and we told you in August, is that this certainly is not a one and done. We're going to keep doing this work. We were talking already with Clay this morning about, okay, when are you going to come back? Our elementaries need it. And so he's with us, and his team will be with us for quite some time. So with that, I want to welcome Dr. Cook back to our stage, and we will be here. We'll take a break at some point soon.
Hello, can you hear me? So, we're going to spend some time together. Lucky you. Or unlucky you. So, yeah, we're going to begin with just kind of a broader perspective. And that is the couch. Schools do lots of things, do they not? Like, I consider things as programs, practices, products that we're supposed to adopt and deliver, right? The aim is to create higher quality experiences for students. Because if we create higher quality experiences, it's through experiences that kids change. That's how you change. If you get a really enriched experience, you can change. If you get a non-enriched experience, then you're not going to change for the betterment. So we're trying to create enriched experiences through the things we're trying to put in place. How many of you recognize there's different named things that get put on your plate? You can name stuff. Now there's a tendency when there's multiple named things to look at them as different, competing, but really those things are meant to combine together in a way that impacts the flow of our behavior throughout the day. Because it all relates to our behavior. And how do they fluidly work together? How do things around relationships fit with proactive classroom management? And how does social emotional learning curriculum actually fit with the flow of how we behave from when the bell rings in the morning to when students exit the building at the end of the day? What we're really talking about is trying to develop an understanding how these things fit together and impact the flow of our behavior from when the bell rings to when the students leave us, versus thinking about the named things as being separate from one another. I'm going to push you beyond that, because we're going to talk about kind of 3 areas of named things today: proactive classroom management, relationship strategies. They're not competing. It's really trying to organize the flow of your behavior throughout the day. Because that's it. You come here and you're going to behave for how much time? So we're just trying to optimize our behavior within that time. And so we look at it as trying to optimize our behavior instead of getting overwhelmed. Wow, there's 6 named things. No, it's my behavior. How can I optimize my behavior within the time I'm spending with students? So I create a more enriched experience. And if I create a more enriched experience, that's how kids change. That's how brains change. So if you feel like you're on your A game teaching and students are really engaged in it and they learn stuff, you go to independently test them and they're able to put back on you and think critically about what you've taught them. Where did that happen? Did that happen in their big toe? How are they able to do that? What changed for them to be able to do that? Their brain changed. How did their brain change? Based on the experience you created. So we're talking about creating an optimal experience for students that allow them to change and develop and grow in really meaningful ways. So one way we think about this to simplify it, and we went over this last time, we're trying to create a very healthy environment, because healthy environments create these experiences that are good for everybody. A healthy environment is predictable, it's positive, and it's safe. That's a healthy environment, because now you're in an experience that's healthy, that allows you to fully plug in. What does an inconsistent, non-predictable environment do for people? To allow them to plug into an experience. Turn to someone and talk. If it's an inconsistent and you can't predict what's going to happen next, what does that do to someone? Raise your hand. You can hear me clap 2 times. What's a negative versus positive environment? What does that do for someone's experience? How many of you believe we have to hold students accountable for their behavior? Are there ineffective ways to hold people accountable? Are there ineffective ways to hold teachers accountable? Are there effective ways to hold people accountable? Are there supportive ways to hold people accountable? Do we want to just let kids get away with crud and never learn that their choices have consequences to them? So, how do we hold accountable, but in an effective way, in a more positive, supportive way versus a negative way? How many of you want someone to just watch you and be super critical but never provide positive feedback based on what you're doing? And that's going to be really healthy for you. That's going to create a really good experience for you. So what we're trying to do is do the best we can with our behavior to create positive, healthy environments, because we are the student's environment. We're a walking, talking, dynamic aspect of students' environment who are in control over a lot of things based in the classroom. How about healthy relationships? Is that part of a good environment for someone? If there's an unhealthy relationship in the home, well, it undermines the kid's growth and development because it's introducing certain experiences for the kid. So we have to look at our relationships with students, even the ones who we're struggling with the most. So that's where we often have to focus first, not last. Who are we struggling with the most? And that's where we need to bring our attention. And then we got to build kids from the inside out, and that's cultivating their own self-regulation and competencies. And that's through intentional teaching of certain knowledge, skills, and dispositions that are going to enable them to better regulate self while they're in school, and then hopefully become self-sufficient, contributing members of society once they transition into post-secondary education life. And we have all kinds of data. Many of our young people, when they make that transition, are not doing well. And the question is, are we actually teaching the knowledge and skills and dispositions that enable our young people to make that transition successfully? And many of the times, we're not. So, we get to these ingredients. This is all just about how I'm behaving. I'm trying to create an environment. I'm paying attention to the relationships. I'm trying to be intentional about when I'm dedicating time to instruction, that I'm focusing on meaningful knowledge, skills, and dispositions that are going to enable them. And then I recognize not all kids are going to have the same level of need in my class, and I might have to differentiate experiences to the maximum extent possible, because you will tap out in your ability to differentiate. You can't do it. You don't have room and capability. But we also have to have a lens that not all kids are going to respond to the same kind of experience, and we might have to adapt things for certain students. And at the point at which you tap out, that's when we need others to come and support us, because the student may need an intervention above and beyond that which we can do by ourselves. So let's get into proactive classroom management. This is going to be a review, so you're going to do kind of a self-assessment. Can you make anybody do anything? Can you make someone? Can you grab a student and just like make them sit down and hold their eyeballs open and make them right? How many of you feel like doing that sometimes though? Oh yeah, okay, let's do it. Okay, you want to do this? Let's do this. It's like the worst in you starts to come out, you're like, oh, that's kind of ugly. Look at that. Yeah, okay. I now have developed self-awareness. That's a button. When you get pushed, I come up with very unhelpful thoughts about the student, about what I want to do to the student, and I wish the student maybe could just evaporate from my existence. So we can't make anybody do anything. So here's the challenge, right? You can't make anybody do anything. If you could, with your words, you would be not only a billionaire, I would argue you would be a trillionaire, because you would come up with the magic recipe for most of our problems in life. Just make people do effective things through your words. If you come up with those words, let me know, because we're going to go become extremely rich, because we're going to write a book and we're going to have essentially a recipe for problems. You can't make anybody, but you can have a significant influences on the choices someone makes. How do you influence someone else? Turn to somebody. How does someone have a positive influence on someone else so you increase the probability they're likely to make a certain choice? How do you influence someone positively? All right, if you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. How do you positively influence someone? How about role modeling, the behaviors you want to see? Are we actually modeling the conduct when we're interacting with our peers and when we're in learning environments and when we have growth opportunities in front of us? Are we modeling the behaviors we want the students to exhibit? That's a question. Or am I actually contradicting the thing I want from students, but I'm not going to model it myself? How many of you as a parent, you realize sometimes the thing, oh, I modeled that. Like most of the things point back to me with my kids. I'm like, why the heck are you doing that? Geez, what's wrong? And I'm like, oh. Maybe it's because I've modeled that behavior. Both of my, if you knew me in my private life, I sometimes need to stop being goofy because it's like, now's not the time for that. So like, I'll rile my girls up before it's like, they're supposed to be going to bed. The opposite of like calming down is what I'm doing. And then they're acting goofy, and then now I actually want them to go to bed, and I'm like, what? Oh gosh. I'm standing in a contradiction. So we can influence your modeling. How else do we positively influence? Building a sense of trust. Do you think that creates the conditions for your words to have an impact on someone else? How many of you would love for your words to be able to correct behavior? That'd be nice. So then we know trust is essential, but trust is probably going to be harder if we're not intentional, because if certain students are engaging in behaviors, we might be engaging in interactions that harm sense of trust and connection. And that's the tension. That's the dilemma that we're all confronted with when you manage a group behavior, a group of students' behavior. Is like, I got to develop a sense of trust because I might need to correct their behavior. And that's true for me. I teach graduate students. And if I don't have that, do you think my grad students are sometimes online looking at all kinds of things, doing instant messaging, and I'm going to go correct their behavior? How do you think that's going to go? So if I want to influence them, then I have to spend time getting to know them and being intentional and purposeful. We went over this last time, and this is just, there's things beyond our control, is there not? How many of you don't just go kick down the door of a home and try to get parents to change? How many of that's kind of beyond your control? You're not doing that. So are home conditions beyond your control? Oftentimes, are they not? Or they feel that way. We might be able to communicate, but we can try to influence through our communication, but at some point it just doesn't go anywhere. So we ultimately have to always figure out what within the environment I'm in charge of do I have control over implementing. And so anytime a person's struggling in our presence, we always ask, what is missing from the environment that I'm responsible for, that I have control over doing, in terms of altering the experience for the student? Because that's where we have to go. Because the more we talk and think about factors beyond our control, the less empowered we feel to actually make a change. If you spend more time thinking about the factors that go beyond your control, you're going to feel less efficacious and feel like there isn't nothing you can do. So we have to always focus on that which we have control over. So we're going to get over, we have control over these things. This is just a subset of stuff that we have control over in terms of our behavior that can have an influence. Because it boils down to how do you want to spend your time? Where do you want to spend your time? Because time will be spent. Where do you want to spend it? Do you want to spend it reacting, or do you want to spend it proactively doing stuff? Why would someone say that time spent, or let me rephrase this. Why does the evidence suggest Every 1 minute spent engaging in proactive strategies, you're likely to save up to 5 to 8 minutes on the back end having to react. Why? What explains that finding that's consistently uncovered? Turn to someone and talk. How? How do we, what explains why we're able to get more time in the long run? All right, if you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. So what explains, over the long run, for every 1 minute we invest in a proactive strategy, we're likely to save 5 to 8 minutes on the back end having to react? I mean, you can think about this if you're a coach, if you're a music teacher, the more proactively you try to support behavior, the less you're going to have to react and correct. So what explains that? What do proactive strategies do? Set up norms so people are crystal clear on the expectation and understand what it looks like to do the thing they're about to do. So there's no wiggle room. We don't expect students to mind read us. And a lot of people expect students to, they should know better. They should know better. So should adults. But you have to create norms and expectations on how we're going to function and be with one another in this setting. Or else you expect people to read you, why are you doing that? Well, I expected you to somehow know what I was thinking, and now you defied what I was thinking, and now I'm upset with you because you didn't do this thing that I never told you I wanted you to do. Seem familiar in life? Have ever have someone do that to you and you get upset? Well, you never freaking told me. Jeez, back up. So we can sit here and play this little game and explain why those days are. Let's get to more of the meat of this. One way to organize what we do is we're trying to do proactive stuff. That means we're trying to encourage their strategies we're doing to encourage and influence students doing the things that we want them to do, which means they're being engaged and they're cooperating and they're, on task instead of off task. But then we have to teach. Have we even protected any time to teach those things in our classroom environment? If the answer is no, then you're missing a really important point. Because now you're expecting students to read your mind. And then we have to come up with, we will react to behavior. And what are skillful ways that we can put in place effective reactive strategies where we're actually holding students accountable for their choices, but we're doing so in a skillful way. And it may mean they're going to lose other opportunities that they could have otherwise earned. And that's to show that there are consequences for the choices. But I still try to preserve my relationship with the person. If there happens to be some relational strain, then I'm going to circle back to the individual and fix it. But we start just letting kids loose, like, nah, this one I'm willing to let go. I'm going to let this one go. Why? Because the behavior's bugging me. And do you know what they said to me? And so we have to confront that internal emotional reaction to what students say and do in our presence and try to come up with more helpful and hopeful ways to think about it. And maybe longer term ways to think about this student. Problem behavior. And that problem behavior occurs because the student's trying to get their needs met. So we have to have things where we wash off lighter fluid. They're neutralizing routines. Neutralizing routines is when students enter classes, they're a routine that helps dissipate any of the funk. If kids are irritated, annoyed, tired, what can we do as a neutralizing routine to start class off to try to wash off lighter fluid? Then we got to do things that prevent matches and set kids up to be more able to manage the matches. The matches are you asking them to do things they don't feel like doing. The matches could be particular types of interactions that are going to occur in class that they don't like. The matches are going to be availability of peers' attention as more motivating than the thing you've created them to do. Those are all the matches. How are we actually setting them up to be able to handle the matches? Those are our proactive strategies. What are we doing to teach the things we want students to do? And if they're confronted with situations where the matches occur, how are they going to handle those? To maintain kind of non-disruption, to allow others to get their work done? What are the behaviors you've cultivated in your class so students know what you expect of them? And essentially, the replacement behaviors they can use if something's not working for them in class. How do they actually communicate that to you in your environment? And last, what do we do to react? We've tried all that, but the student still does a problem behavior. How are we effectively reacting to that? Okay, I want a parallel process here. What works for adults works for kids. Somehow we just start to separate, well, we're secondary and, we're unique. Yeah, you're unique, you're larger, but there's just human needs. What works for adults works for students. So if we want to support adult behavior in environments, this is what we have to do. So I'm just calling a thing is a named thing that has concrete practices and it relates to specific behaviors that people are being supported to do. Okay? So just plug in anything. PBIS, delivery of an SEL curriculum, proactive classroom management. We know people are going to behave consistent with the thing if leadership allocates time and attention to teach and revisit expectations about the thing. People will not do the thing if you don't allocate time for them and you don't give attention to it. Leadership models the thing. Leadership monitors and gives feedback, and it should be about the thing. What if you don't monitor and give people feedback, both positively and correctively, about the thing? Leadership provides proactive supports and reminders to encourage people to do the thing. Leadership recognizes or rewards staff for doing the thing. Leadership responds to situations consistently, calmly, and with empathy when people struggle to do the thing. This is supportive accountability. Now we say, okay, what works for students? When teachers allocate time and attention to teach and revisit expectations regarding the behavior. Teacher models the expected behavior. Teacher monitors and gives students feedback to students about the behavior. Teacher provides proactive supports and reminders to encourage behavior. Teacher recognizes or rewards students for doing behavior. And teacher responds to behavior consistently, calmly, and with empathy when students struggle with the behavior. This is how you change behavior and support the behavior of interest, whatever it is. So the reflection point is, to what extent are we doing these? Have you created these in your environment? Because this is the science of promoting the behavior you want. Whether we're trying to support adult behavior or whether we're trying to support student behavior. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go through, and if you feel comfortable talking with others around you, just go through a checklist. And the checklist is check it off. Do the students clearly understand expectations to behave successfully in class? I would push you, if I took a random sample of students from your class, could they tell me with crystal clarity what are your expectations for what it looks like to be successful in your environment? This is your own reflection, so if you don't feel comfortable, don't have to. This is yours, nobody else's. But I just want to get our juices flowing around opportunities for incremental growth and improvement to create more proactive, supportive environments. Do you provide students with consistent feedback by acknowledging and recognizing when they exhibit the expected behavior? Is there ways of recognizing and acknowledging students for doing the right thing with their behavior in your environment? So you're growing that. Do you have supports in place that help students transition successfully into classroom? If student intrinsic motivation is low, what motivational enhancements are available? Or do you have motivational enhancements that are available? All right, so spend a little bit, if you feel comfortable, kind of go through this. You might identify that you're doing more in certain areas than others, but just kind of go through and kind of through this mental checklist. And we're going to get closer to actual concrete practices here in a minute. All right, if you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. We're going to keep progressing here. This one's a really important one. Is there anything that says students have to be academically, intrinsically motivated in every subject they participate in? Were you? But everybody, when you're a singleton person in charge of a subject, you expect everybody to be intrinsically motivated in your subject. But is that the reality? Is that humanity? And then is intrinsic motivation a static phenomenon that never fluctuates? How many of you aren't intrinsically motivated to be here? No, it's like if you're not, and you're not, oh, whatever it is. So I want to raise my hand. How many of you are going to be less intrinsically motivated to be here by 3 o'clock? Like it's Friday too. How many of you are kind of, as the week wears on, your intrinsic motivation keeps kind of going down? How many of you have seen it go down since the beginning of the year to about now, and you can't wait for Thanksgiving? It's not a static phenomenon. It fluctuates based on our mood, how much sleep we got, whether we're ill. The question is that you have this base assumption, not every student in my environment is going to be intrinsically motivated. What are the motivational enhancement I have in place for when that's not going to be the case for a given kid? What's going to help regulate their motivation to do the thing still? So that's a question you got to resolve. Well, I don't agree with that. I just expect them all. And if they don't want to, then I'm going to, okay, negative environment? What type of environment are we going to create? And are we going to be reacting? I'm not going to proactively put that in place. I'm just going to spend time reacting when kids' intrinsic motivation is low. And I'm going to create negative interactions that harm sense of trust, and then make it just more challenging in the long run. So I hope those are starting to connect some dots. If you can honestly, and with visible evidence, check off all these, you know you're on your A game. You're probably sitting here, I freaking got this. Actually, I do want to get my computer out and start looking at stuff. So remember we did this and said, look at all this crud you can do. Let's not overwhelm ourselves. Let's look at these. So these are the proactive classroom management strategies. So here's what I'm going to urge you to do. In whatever little groupings you are in your areas, because we're seated straight, but however you want to communicate, 2 people, 3, 4, 5, however you want to talk. I want you to go through these, and I want you to kind of go one by one. A 0, I have amnesia, I don't remember anything about what that actually entails. 1, I kind of got it, but I'm still a little fuzzy. To a 2, I with crystal clarity know exactly what that practice looks like to bring to life in the classroom environment. All right? Then I'm going to ask us, and just because I don't want to tell you what they are again, I want us to go through then anything where we're feeling a little weak about, then I want us to review, because what we're going to get to is I'm going to urge you to, just like you did a reflection here, I'm going to have you do a reflection of these practices. So you recognize that you do have some strengths and you have some opportunities for growth and improvement. And if you're going to try to continuously improve, to create a more proactively supportive environment from now until the end of the year, what are some things you can work on? Not a ton of things at once. What could you potentially take on and try to incrementally improve? And start to develop a plan on how you work that into the flow of your behavior when you run class. So spend some time. 2, got it. I know exactly what it looks like in terms of to bring that practice to life in the classroom. A 1, I'm a bit fuzzy, but I think I got it. And a 0 means I don't know. I'm really, I can kind of get the label, but ultimately I don't know what that practice would concretely look like to manifest itself into in the classroom environment. All right, go for it. We'll spend maybe 5 to 7 minutes. I'll check in and see if we need a little more time. If not, we're moving on. Raise your hand if you're feeling good. Raise your hand if you need more time. We're feeling good. So I'm going to just take one, because I would assume this one, there's way more than meets the eye here. It's not just standing and saying hi and bye. It's actually 5 components. If you actually understood what this one is, this one's all about being intentional about how students transition into the classroom and exit the classroom each day. And you're bringing a level of intentionality. So you're first greeting them to welcome them into the environment. You're issuing reminders about what the expected behavior is. So you're essentially activating their frontal lobe to help them remember what they should be doing. You have a high preferred activity that they transition into the environment to do. Any student that you maybe struggled with the previous day, you're there to restore a relationship. And the last is you're exiting students intentionally out of the environment by making sure you're actually saying goodbye and offering some type of encouragement. Or either to see you tomorrow or whatever it is, but you're being intentional about how students exit out of your environment instead of, imagine how a lot of environments, the bell rings, it's chaos, they leave, there's no kind of touch point in terms of how students exit out of the environment. I'm very intentional about doing that in my environment. So it's not just saying hi and goodbye. So are there any other ones where you say, oh, it's 0 or a 1 out of any of these? So this is that, I'm going to just go back here. If you didn't check that off, this is the kind of antidote to that. So if you don't have anything, this is the strategy that assumes that obviously kids are intrinsically motivated, great, because they're going to be plugged in. But I'm assuming not all kids are going to be there, and even some kids who are, it might fluctuate on them depending on circumstances in their lives and times of the year. How many of you have kids who do pretty well, but then as soon as they start their holiday or around those, or when they come back, it's like, what the heck happened to you? What's going on? Okay, that just means intrinsic motivation's lower. What do you have in place? So I got to just increase my negativity. That's what I'm going to do. That's my strategy, is to be even more upset. I'm going to double down. I'm going to start yelling, actually. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start yelling at the students. Nobody gets up and has that plan, like as a technique, but nonetheless, if we're not careful, all of a sudden I'm kind of yelling at students. It's like, but you didn't plan that. We're all capable of this. So we're trying to recognize if that happens, we're not horrible people, one. We need to fix it if we did handle ourselves in a way where we later say, oh, I could have handled that one better. And then the second thing is we're trying to be intentional about our planning. So the class-wide motivation system is what are some motivational enhancements that kids can earn access to in your environment, different privileges, things that they could otherwise earn that go above and beyond just the subject matter content. I know you care about your subject. I know that you've chosen this as a profession. Not all students are going to choose your subject as a profession. And it's okay. You've determined that your profession is essential, though. They need to have this knowledge because it's in their best interest. But how am I going to keep them plugged in? Last time we discussed there's 3 types of motivation systems. One, everybody, sorry, I got to turn off my phone. One is an all for one. Everybody's going to work together, and if the students as a whole, and there's a little pre-teaching, and I will share resources on how to get this up and running if this is something of interest, or you can split the class into teams, but people in whatever unit, whole class, smaller teams, are working together with one another to support one another's behavior in class. And if they do that and they engage with the behaviors, then there's some type of privilege or activity or experience they can earn in your class, whatever you feel comfortable. There's something in it above and beyond just the subject content that's going to keep them invested to plug in. But I proactively created this, and I have this scaffold in place because if kids' motivation's low, this then helps co-regulate their motivation to stay plugged in. How many of you are a coach? And I'm sorry, because I was a student athlete, I always think coaching. I'm sorry if you don't like sports. But hopefully there's a point that you can generalize to something that's more preferred for you. But I look at this. How many of you have used the strategy? Like, if we really get to business, this practice, then we won't have to do those extra sprints or something. And you've created a condition where students maybe can get out of something based on working together as a unit to do something. Or they can earn access to something. Well, if we are ever going to do this, we can do the funner activity versus the other thing. That's what I'm saying. It's if-then. You've created an if-then contingency in your environment. If you bring it with your behavior, even on days when you don't feel like it, then I'm going to recognize and acknowledge you for that, and you can access an experience. And whether you can access that experience each period, that's for you to figure out, or is it something that accrues, and by the end of the week, the team. That's an all for one. The other one is what we call one for all. And that's where one person in the environment, I'm looking to really step up and exhibit the behaviors. And they have to know what the behaviors. So if you haven't taught the behavioral expectations, it's hard to then create an if-then contingency. Because if what? We do what? I don't know what you want from us. So you have to actually, it kind of forces you to say what you want in terms of the behaviors. If the person who I'm looking for is doing this today, then the whole class gets payoff. So you don't know who it is. And that's a different motivation. It keeps everybody on, because anybody can be accountable and responsible for that behavior. It puts a healthy amount of pressure, positive pressure, on students staying plugged in. And if the student didn't do it, you don't then point them out and shame them and say, hey, go bully and harass this person, but I just don't want to be there when you're doing it. We're not, you did it, she messed up, that was it. That's not how we do it. Or you do to each his or her own. This is harder to manage in a classroom environment. That means each person is on their own little motivation system. I typically, if I'm running an environment, I have an all for one, I have a one for all, and I have a couple of students on their own little motivation systems because I'm differentiating behavior supports. Because they need something above and beyond. Why do they need differentiated motivational supports? Because they're probably dealing with more things outside of school that are sapping their internal motivation. How many of you think chronic stress and toxic situations outside of school can decrease a kid's motivation when they come to school to stay plugged in? So that's why I'm differentiating the support. I'm not trying to let the bad kid get good stuff. Because I've heard all this, what, we're letting the bad kid do stuff? No, I'm differentiating supports because this kid has different motivational needs because this kid's dealing with different circumstances outside of here. That's why I'm doing it. So if I'm trying to work, but I wouldn't start to get up all these things simultaneously. I would start with the all for one. If I'm going to start with one, it'd be an all for one. And when I split my class up into teams, I'm going to have them name their team, kind of personalize their team, and then you're tracking the behavior. And if all members are doing it, then they get payoff. But you got to create the then what? Is it a privilege? Is it an experience? Do they get out of something that they would otherwise had to do? And that is kind of relief and excitement because now they get to use their time differently. That's an example, but I can share a resource that kind of gives a little more detail. And then it's just figuring it out. You need kind of a little bit of protection time. What would it look like for me to start to kind of experiment with this in my class and see if I get some of the traction? But the main goal is to create motivational enhancements for kids when their intrinsic motivation is low. So here's what I want you, is there any more of these? Or are they all as clear as mud? So pre-correction, pre means before you're ever acting to correct. So before students go to do whatever you want them to do, you touch base on what the expectations and the behaviors are before they even do it. So in an environment, I might identify, my students probably need one at the beginning of class, then I transition from whole group to small group. That would be an opportunity for a pre-corrective statement, and I just work into my flow pre-corrective statements, because if I don't pre-correct, I'm going to be reacting when students aren't doing what I want them to do. And so you just sift through your time and figure out, if I don't pre-correct, I'm going to be reacting. So now I'm going to front load that with a brief pre-corrective statement to remind and encourage students to exhibit those behaviors. And so you sift throughout your day. You all are more effective, students are more effective if we have pre-corrections. Pre-corrections are, before you go do the things, they basically serve as reminders to activate your frontal lobe so now you can better regulate your behavior. Because a lot of people aren't sitting there thinking about, what are the expectations as I transition into this next thing? It's not like on the forefront of their mind. But you're trying to bring it to the forefront of their mind so it can now serve the purpose of regulating their behavior. Numerous opportunities to respond. Active engagement. Students are answering questions, writing answers, talking to others about the answers, or making recommendations, or suggesting solutions. And so the more opportunities kids have to respond and interact with their learning, the more engagement. So here's what I want to do, because we want to transition into relationships soon. I want you to try to, relatively briefly, go through each one of these and your own implementation. And just take the truth serum, don't overly inflate, really talk about the realities of whether you're, to what extent you're using this, if at all. If not at all, who cares? This is your baseline. And it might be fodder for you to consider whether you would want to try to get that practice up and running in your environment. But I can guarantee you, if we had people who were authentically and truthfully in this column and all of these, they'd virtually have very minimal behaviors they're reacting to. Because that's what it is. These things additively combine to create a proactive environment where there's minimal behaviors to react to. It doesn't mean that there's never, but there's minimal behaviors to react to because of the intentionality to get these types of stuff up and running. So I'm going to encourage you just to do your little reflection. You might want to share with others to see where they're at, to recognize, hey, there's some similarities and differences, and then we're going to move on. So let's take like 3 to 5 minutes for you to kind of go through this. And if you can, try to jot it down. All this stuff is linked in your agenda as well, just so you know. It's all linked in there. All right, if you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. You're going to have some time, it seems like, to do some planning later today or throughout, even from now until the end of the year, or from now until the end of your career. You will have protected time to think through this. What are some opportunities for incremental improvement to create a more proactively supportive environment? The more time we proactively support people, they plug in with their behavior, they get more out of their experiences, and the less we have to react to their behavior, because that's when all bets are off and there's an increased tendency for negative interactions. And then what do negative interactions do? Potentially do more to harm than they do to facilitate. So, let's take this as a natural break. We're going to kind of switch gears here a little bit, go over a methodology for relationship. Are we cool with how long? 10 minutes? Are we cool with 10 minutes? Do what you got to do. We'll start up in 10 minutes on the dot. warning and we're going to get going. So you can try to make your way to your seat. If you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. So I'm going to just open up with something. As we're going to move into relationship methodology. This is a heuristic, excuse me, that helps us understand where we're at with our students. Are you really in the established phase? That means you don't have trust and connection and understanding established. Your job's going to be a lot harder for certain students if you don't have a relationship established. Why? Maintain, just because you've built a relationship doesn't mean you're going to keep it over time. You actually have to engage in healthy maintenance strategies. And then all relationships, even if they're healthy, may have a negative interaction and there will be a need to restore. And so one way just provides a heuristic to think about relationship with your colleagues, with the parents of the students you serve, with your students. Where are you at? You're going to struggle to the extent you don't have a healthy relationship with the other people for whom you interact with, in terms of colleagues. And so everybody has a degree of ownership in this. But we also have to figure out, how do we focus? So this helps us focus. The main people we're worried about is people who are in the establish and restore. Because if you're at this time point in the year and a kid doesn't have a sense of trust and connection and belonging in your environment, wow, they've been existing in school for how long? What happens when people don't have a sense of belonging? They check out. How many of you see kids who check out? Now, at the root cause, this doesn't explain all checking out, okay? But at the root cause, for some reasons why kids check out, do you think it's because they don't feel like they're a valued, respected, wanted member of that environment? Do you think certain kids, if you ask them, they feel that way? Nationally speaking, we know 40% of secondary students feel that way. I was just in a school district, West, I'll say that. They do student climate surveys. Student report, only 15% of the kids indicate that they feel like they belong and that there's anybody in terms of teachers want them to be there. 15%. If you look at their data, they have high suicide rates. They have high truancy rates, really high truancy rates, like way beyond. It's a mirror. If people feel like they belong, they're valued, respected, wanted members, they plug in. And so the data in mental health correspond with it. The data in terms of attendance correspond with that. So we got to treat relationships as if the quality of the student's educational experiences depended on it. because it does. So I want us to touch base here. What would you plug in this for you? When I imagine myself at the end of this year, I did what in my relationships with students? I just want you to internalize that for you. So what did you do? And then I want you to take it a step farther, and if you feel comfortable talking with others, first think about what your professional values are. Your professional values are what you want to stand for, be recognized for. If a student wrote you a letter, who was one of your former students, what would you want them to say about you? If your colleagues wrote you a letter, or you had, imagine your own retirement party, and they gave you a surprise retirement party when it came to that phase of your career, and they were going to stand up and give a roast about you, what would you want your colleagues to say about you? What an angry person. No. That person did not like to collaborate. Nobody's going to say that. Like, what would you want to stand for? What would you want people to say about you? Then I'm going to ask you to go a step farther once you've formulated some idea. Values get fuzzy, because it's like, what are you freaking talking about? What? They get a little fuzzy, but come up with something. How is building healthy relationships with students connected to your professional values? What if your values are around your subject? Because you love your subject. How is building healthy relationships connected? I'm going to push you to try to connect the two. Even if you love your subject, the reason why you got in this profession is the subject. You have a passion for it. How is building healthy relationships with students connected to that value? All right, so go for it and just kind of plug in here. Don't spend a ton of time. And then maybe articulate how building healthy relationships could be connected to your professional values. That's what you think matters most in terms of what you want to stand for, be recognized for by colleagues and the students you serve in your professional role. Let's spend a few minutes here, and then we're going to get into the practices.
Right, but if something freaky happens.
If the light is on.
Yeah, if you see the video,
I just
All right, if you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. This is some work we've done in another district where we're trying to bring an intentional focus on building healthy relationships with students. There's videos around what students are saying about the impact that their teachers are having on their well-being and development. And then we also have videos where staff have brought out at each of the levels and each of the settings where staff bring out the letters they've received from either parents or students that are saying things about the impact they've had on the lives of someone. Because we have to remind ourselves, why are we here? Do we want to be a healthy place for kids? Because schools aren't inherently healthy places for kids, by the way. Like I look at sleep. We spend a third of our life doing it. Schools make sleep hard for kids. We make it virtually impossible for secondary kids to get the amount of sleep biologically they need, and insufficient sleep actually leads to more mental health problems, creates daytime sleepiness, increases the likelihood for later long-term health problems. So schools aren't just inherently healthy places. They can become really healthy places if we have certain things that are in place for kids. Kids who feel like they don't belong based on their interactions and experiences, it's not a healthy place to be. So I'm going to just give you an example of how we try to elevate this and make this part of the collective value system. And we start to give people permission to take some of the time to reflect on their relationship status with kids.
I don't know if you remember this, but last year you took the time to ask me how I was doing when I was stressed.
Sometimes it may seem like I do not love your class. I don't always show it, but I truly love and enjoy your class every day.
Dear Mrs. Gray, thank you for everything you have done.
You really helped me with my college applications, and thanks to you, I got in.
Sometimes school is hard, but I love learning, and someday I would love to be a teacher like you.
You see, things have been very hard for me at home. I don't believe I have told you, but my parents are going through a particularly nasty divorce. I don't even know where home is anymore.
Journal entry number 32. This might be the only kindness a student sees all day. Don't forget them. The way I respond to a student matters. Be welcoming to all students with open arms.
Remember why you do this. It's about the students. It's always about the students.
Be passionate and teach them to believe in their abilities and themselves. Always show excitement and encourage students to follow their dreams.
Everyone, including me, has their own battles. I don't know what everyone else is going through. Be sensitive to that, showing empathy towards them, trying my best to show that I care.
I will never forget you.
Words can't describe how thankful I am for you.
You made me believe in myself.
I will miss you.
I will always remember you.
Thank you for always saying the best of me.
Thank you very much, and I love you.
You made a powerful difference in my life.
So those are all students and staff. This student was a student who struggled with his behavior, is now at Stanford University playing football, was at risk for dropping out. People didn't give up and get annoyed with the behavior, kept invested. There's some unique circumstances where people were more likely to keep invested with an athlete, though? What if this was a non-athlete? Would this system have responded similarly to keep the kid plugged in relationally? Some of us might have hypotheses around that. So it's like, are we going to let kids fall through the relational cracks? Is a question for communities of educators to kind of embrace and figure out. And if we don't want to, then what's the methodology that we're going to use to bring a degree of intentionality to this? So we know just from neuroscience, psychology, education, every field, that basically relationships are a core human need. These are some academic data, the number of strong relationships with staff. As you see, the number of relationships, academic motivation goes up, social emotional behavior and skills goes up as the number of relationships with the adults. Responsibility, kids taking more ownership, goes up when they have positive relationships. The number of relationships, high-risk behaviors go down. Whatever we look at, they have an impact. Whatever we look at, the number of healthy relationships with the adults for whom they're interacting with, basically virtually all the meaningful outcomes that we care about are impacted by it. Motivation, academic motivation, is more driven by who's doing the teaching than what the subject is. So how many of you want motivated kids? So then what's the process to create motivation in our environments? So I want you to just turn to someone and maybe take turns. On a scale of 1 to 10, how is it important for teachers to make room on their plates and devote time to build relationships with students? 1, not important. 10, this is your answer. And if you trust the people who are around you, you probably feel comfortable telling them and speaking your truth, what you honestly think this is. And then I want you to react to this. Why did you give it that number and not a lower one? Okay? If I gave it a 3, I'm going to say, why did I give it a 3 and not a 1 or a 2? And I'm going to talk about why. Okay? That's what I want you to react to. Come up with your number. You don't want to share it? That's fine if you feel okay. Tell the other person your number and talk about why it's not a lower number. Okay? Go for it. hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. So I'm going to push this a little bit farther. Why is it important for us to actually pay attention to those students who don't feel like they belong? Because most of the time, the kids who do feel like they belong are getting the most attention. I mean positive attention. I mean positive relational attention, like relationally enhancing attention, not potentially relationally. No, nobody's getting up, remember, we don't have to blame ourselves or like, feel blamed. This is like human nature. If we're not intentional, we could, when things don't go as expected, it increases the potential for us to interact negatively with the other person. But why is it important for us to pay attention to which ones and scan? If we're going to devote time and energy, we need to figure out who's not feeling like they belong. Turn to someone and talk. Why? What would be the point of being intentional about identifying who's not feeling a certain way? What's the aim? Go for it. All right, if you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. Why is it that we like to work with people who are motivated? Like if you're going to say, who do you like to work with? Why is it most of the time people are going to say, I like to work with kids who are motivated? We know this is true of teachers. We know this is true of mental health providers. Because when people are motivated to change, we feel confident. We feel more confident. We feel efficacious. Why is it that we don't like to work with people who are not motivated? So anybody here of motivational interviewing before? What's ineffective at making someone change? So imagine you're having a political discussion at Thanksgiving. You have opposing viewpoints. What never works? And you think you have, the current circumstances, and I have all the ammunition, and I'm right and justified, and I just need to share that with you. And once I share it with you, you'll forever change your perspective through this debate that's happening publicly and everybody else is feeling awkward about. What doesn't work to change and motivate someone to change? One-way communication. So here's the deal. It's like stop the struggle and realize we call them pre-contemplators. Pre-contemplator is someone who's not really motivated to change. So your goal is just try to get them to be more motivated to want to change. The best way to get someone to motivated to change is to ask them questions and listen. And show you actually care to understand their perspective. You're not agreeing with it, but you're caring about hearing what is rubbing them wrong or why they feel a certain way. But you're also getting them to explore reasons why their current behavior isn't going to work for them in the long run in a meaningful way to them. If you want to motivate someone to change, you have to alter how you relate and communicate with them. What's an anti-motivational strategy for a kid who's not motivated to behave well in class? Would that work at Thanksgiving? Think about doing the same technique, and you use that with someone who you're trying to change their perspective and get them motivated to change some type of belief or behavior, and you do the same strategy with someone at Thanksgiving. Would that work to motivate them? So that's the question. But our family's different, right? Some of our perspectives, like, you got to see my family. So I'm just going to challenge us to think a little bit differently. When we have someone who's not motivated to change, that's someone in need for us to connect relationally with them and engage in skillful conversation with them as a method of drawing connection and getting them to ultimately recognize the reasons why they need to change. Because you see it, they may not yet. And so we're not telling them. How many of you don't change when someone comes and just gets on their soapbox with you and just like beats you down by telling you the things you need to do better? How many of you, if you did that in your marriage, it wouldn't work? I got some things to tell you. I've been really closely observing your behavior, and here's the things I don't like about it. Here's the things I need you to start doing differently starting now, okay? All right, here we go. Listen. Check it out. Listen. But then we take younger, underdeveloped humans, and then we forget that approach, and we do it. We just tell them. Here's what you need to do better. Here's why. And that's what they're just like, yeah, we don't need to give a shake in your mouth. Have you ever had a kid just look at you with that blank stare and they're shaking their head, but you know they're not even, their body, their carcass is there with you, but they're not there with you? It's like, thank you for having your carcass with me. That's great. Where's your actually brain? It's not in the interaction. So instead we ask open-ended questions and we listen and we reflectively put information back on them. We have them explore reasons for why change might be needed, help them identify goals and see that their behaviors are inconsistent with the goals they want for themselves, activate their sense of values, and so that show that your behaviors are essentially not allowing you to be the person that you ultimately want to be. That's when people start to recognize, dang, I got to change. It's called cognitive dissonance. But we have to connect with people relationally. People who are unmotivated don't want to become motivated for people who they think don't like them. And that doesn't mean you're causing kids. Nobody's at blame, but nonetheless, that's the person's perception. That's the tricky thing. We're dealing with students' perceptions. That doesn't mean you're not trying. So don't read this as like, well, we're all just screwing up. I get the message. No, it just means students' perceptions based on their background experiences and all the experiences leading up to being with you in an environment have led them to perceive the situation as still you probably don't care for them or want them in that environment or don't even care about their perspective. But that doesn't mean you haven't tried, but that's where the kid's at. So how do we try to rectify that nonetheless? So here's the methodology. Really, I'm going to ask you to get out. If someone around you has a computer, I'm going to ask you to get that out because I'm going to have you access some of the resources. Because for this, there's concrete relationship practices I'm going to want you to kind of review. I'm not going to sit here and just tell you what they are. I want you to kind of explore them and kind of assess them. So go ahead and get your computer out now, but we're not there yet for the activity. I'll set that up. So here's the EMR. So we've done this across elementary, middle school, and high school. This is common language of practice. We've done 3 randomized control trials. So this isn't just people making up. We've done randomized control trials, and this is what we get in terms of teacher-student relationship, disruptive behavior going down, academic engaged time going up. We did a middle school study. We replicated similar findings. And then we did high school studies where we look at the effect from September to March in terms of what's happening, in terms of increases in motivation. So what I want to do is get into this idea of establish. Let's focus here. So we have this. What do we do to establish? The first is you got to identify a kid for whom you haven't established a relationship with. Secondary indicators, focus on the class that you're struggling with the most. That is a good indicator. You likely have the weakest relationships with the students in that class. So what are you going to do? With intention, capitalize on the time you have to establish relationships. Here are the different categories. We call it, they're strategies to devote time to get to know the student. So the thing I'm going to try to do is to devote some time to get to know the student. And then there's specific techniques that you can use and that we have detailed out, that you can try, that give you a sense of what it would look like. Instead of you have to make that up, what could you do? But if you have a method that you think is really successful at connecting with a student to get to know them, then use it. If you're uncertain about what that is, we have resources that you can reference as a guide to think through what it might look like for you to devote a pocket of time to connect with a student to get to know them. This one's communicate high expectations and support. Notice it's not just communicate high expectations but don't offer support. Communicating high expectations and offering no support is a flawed model. I hold people to really, really high standards, but I don't support them to meet those standards. What we're going for is high expectations. I believe in you and your capability to meet these expectations because I hold them true for all kids in my class. And I think you're the type of student that can meet and exceed those expectations. I'm also here to support you if you need it. I can offer help, so you offer help proactively. What that means is, say if there's ever a need for help, this is how you signal needing help. And then reactively means you're paying close enough attention to someone. If they're struggling, then you're there to ask if they need help versus just watch it and let them struggle. The next one is provide opportunities for voice and choice. So you're going to gather input from students. Students are actually going to have a say in stuff because you're showing that we care about your perspective versus this is a dictatorship and this is how it's going to run in this context. When developmentally you have a population of young people who are trying to become autonomous, that's in their developmental DNA. They're fundamentally reactionary to anything that is trying to, where adults are trying to make even greater control. Even though we want to have, we are the authority, we do have the power, and we will hold the student accountable, we also want to allow students to have voice and input. And so there's methods where you intentionally gather student voice and input about how things are going with them, things that could be done differently in the classroom, and you're hearing them out. Provide options. You're allowing students to actually have options and increasing choice on how things occur in class versus there's no choice in this. You're going to do what I tell you, and that's how it's going to go. How many of you would react to that as an adult? We're like absolutely no wiggle room at all. And someone was there to maintain your compliance with that very rigid standard. Last, show that you see them. Positive greetings and farewells, talk them up to other adults. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to get out, we call it the EMR playbook. I want you to go through the practices and stay in just the established practice. There's a section, and I want you to review these. And as you're reviewing them, I want you to go through and say, that one's new to me, knew about it, I apply it when I remember to, I've integrated this type of practice fully into what I do. Okay, it's kind of a common thing that you do with students in your environment. Okay? So I want you to just go through and review those. You're staying only on established practices. So you're going to be really, here's at the level of things. 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, you're going to be looking at these. And you should be dialoguing with others around it. All right? Let's spend some time and see where you're at in terms of, this one's new to me, I knew about it, I've done it, but only when I kind of remember to. I fully integrated this type of practice into how I function. Go for it. Huh? Oh, yeah.
If you are having trouble finding these resources, open up the agenda under the EMR section. There's both the full playbook that has all of the pages in it. So this document is also in there. The 1A refers to, oh, and there in the document you have linked in there, it tells you what pages to look in the full guide, and it'll give you a description of each of these strategies. So if you have trouble finding it, raise your hand and we can help to navigate you to where you need to look.
All right, if you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. This is how something like this could work. Usually, what I would do from now until the winter break, I would identify students in my classes for whom I have not yet established a relationship, a healthy relationship with. I'm going to make that manageable. I'm going to determine the number of students who I think I could feasibly be very intentional about interacting with and do some things with in order to cultivate a relationship with. So I could identify, let's say, 3 to 5 students. Who I'm concerned about. I have behavioral indicators that indicate we don't have a healthy relationship established. I'm ready to go. Now I'm sifting through these to identify, maybe inspire me about things I could do, not rigidly adhere to. So I decide, I want to talk this student up to other adults. I notice this kid responds well when we get recognized, but when you don't have a healthy relationship, when you even compliment someone directly, it falls flat. So I'm actually going to talk them up. So this is a method of what we call indirect compliments, where you're going to work through other adults. You can make positive phone calls home. I can make a positive referral to the office. I could work with another teacher who then is going to connect with the student and say something that they heard about that the kid said, did, or achieved, but they know I'm the source of it. And it does more because there's no strings attached in an indirect compliment. You're not trying to get them to shut up and just gain compliance by complimenting them. There's no personal gain for you to have. That's why in establishment phase, they're way more powerful than even direct compliments. I could say I have small windows of time each week. I got like 10 to 15 minute pockets that I'm going to be intentional about trying to connect with the kid and use banking time. And that's just to have a conversation, a non-awkward, non-creepy conversation, using open-ended questions. And we have a open-ended question bank that you can use if you can't think about what might be cool, but I'm going to think about the student, and I'm going to ask some open-ended questions. I'm going to listen, I'm going to react to. And if it's appropriate, I'll share some information. If there's things I learned that's bugging them, I'm going to validate that. The purpose of it isn't trying to get them to do work or change them. That's not the purpose of banking time. As soon as you try to change someone, you shut down things relationally. How many of you have seen an adult trying to change a kid for whom they don't have a relationship with? Does that really go well? If you don't believe me, do it. Go try it. Take a kid who doesn't trust you and just walk up to them, identify something they're not doing that they need to be doing, and start telling them to do it differently. Watch how they react. They might shake their heads, say, oh yeah, but what internally is going on? This person's an idiot or whatever. Just like you would. If someone who you didn't trust comes up to you and starts telling you to behave differently, you'd be like, you'd sit back. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take banking time and I want you to think it through, emotions. You don't have to do this extensive role play, but here's what I want you to do. Think about a student. Make it real. Think about a real kid and imagine you identifying a time to interact with a student and you're going to use skillful communication. What would be the open-ended kind of question that you think would get the conversation started? How might you react when the student, whatever they're saying, in order to show that you're actually paying attention and to track information about them? So I want you to think through the motions. Think through a kid. Think through the open-ended type of question. You can start to engage in conversation to start to learn about the kid. And whatever comes up, I like to kind of shock kids because I'm not trying to rig the open-ended question. So, tell me what you love about school. They're like, oh gosh, shut up. One of these are you kidding me? I like to think, just like, what's lame about school? Give me some. I'm trying to learn. Like, I'm seriously want to know. And then the kid says, well, I don't like how this. And I just validate. You know what? You know, if that's super boring, when I'm plugged in, I sometimes forget what it's like to be a student, but when I'm plugged into super boring professional development stuff as an adult, it's aversive. I get it. You're not justifying their behavior. You're showing that you understand their perspective. So I like to ask open-ended questions that aren't rigged. We're always trying to get these fluffy and what answers we want to hear. And then if they don't give us the answer we want to hear, we start to try to preach to them or teach to them that they got to think differently. That's not the purpose of it. So try to think through, who's a kid, what kind of open-ended question do you think would really resonate with the kid, and then how might you be ready to kind of reflectively listen, depending on what the kid says. Go for it. Clap 2 times. If you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. So there's opportunities, maybe not large opportunities, to fit in interactions with students for whom you know doesn't have a strong sense of connection and belonging in your environment. So there's an opportunity. to carve out some time and think through how can you more skillfully and intentionally interact with them for the purposes of building trust, connection, and understanding. And who are those students that need you to bring that degree of intentionality, or else they're existing in school without a sense of connection? All those positive effects aren't going to accrue for them. In terms of motivation, risk behavior, social, emotional, behavioral performance, you name it. So let's focus on maintain. So maintain, what we think about maintain. So you have a healthy relationship intact. If you have an intimate relationship with someone else, whether it's a marriage or some other arrangement, think through this. If you want to keep that, you better be positively interacting with them, and you better be trying to minimize negative interactions. If you want to keep it healthy. So you better be intentional about positive interactions, and you better be intentional about trying to minimize big negative interactions. Or else now you got to recover and repair those when they do happen. So the way we maintain positive or we engage in positive is non-contingent, meaning you do positive things just because you care and value the other person. It's not contingent on something that they've done for you or that they said or did. That's contingent. You make your positive interaction contingent. Contingent on whether they turn in their assignment. I'm only giving kids positive interactions if they turn in their assignment. That's the only way you get a positive interaction. If you don't want to do that, no, you don't get access to it. That's like, your spouse. Until you do the things for me, you don't get it. What are you looking at? Freaking, you got to do your stuff. I've outlined for you. Then you can get a positive interaction. You can get a greeting, maybe. That's pushing it. I'm not going to greet you when you come home from work and you're tired unless you've done the stuff. I'm going to make it contingent on what you've done. That's a super toxic, nasty environment when you make things contingent. Because people feel like you don't really value and care for them as a person. So non-contingent positive interactions. If you want to keep your marriage, you better be doing non-contingent positive interactions. At least if you want to keep a healthy one. Or if you want to reignite because things have strained a little bit. Well, invest in non-contingent positive interactions. Be thoughtful and intentional about those. Those are greetings. Those are being intentional about saying bye. Those are about checking in on how things are going. Those are all non-contingent. They're not dependent on previous behavior or whether someone's done something that you deem worthy of approval. Are you capable of that with students? You need to, this is the self-reflection, looking in the mirror. Am I capable, if a student did something that I didn't approve of, am I capable of still having a non-contingent positive interaction? We hold on to stuff, and it makes it harder. So we got to figure out how do we let go of that stuff. And that's hard. That's easier said than done. I can sit there and act like I'm good at it. I'm not very good at it. I could try at it. But at least I'm aware that I'm trying. If I'm not aware of it, I don't try. And then I'm missing creating kind of a healthy relational context. Contingent positive interaction is more strategic. Not like weird, manipulative, unethical strategic, but like a healthy strategic to recognize and acknowledge energy and effort someone puts into creating an environment. And you want them to know that something that they did, said, or achieved is worthy of that recognition, and you're showing appreciation for that. That's what I mean. You're contingently responding to something to acknowledge and recognize something as a way of showing them appreciation for the energy and effort they've put in. That means you have to pay attention to their behavior closely rather than ignore their behavior. That's true in a marriage. That's true in your classroom. If you want to have a healthy interaction, pay attention to their behavior, and if they're putting in energy and effort to do something, then acknowledge and recognize that as a form of showing them appreciation. That's what we mean by that. We go into a lot of environments and these things are super lean, but they're heavy on correction. I shouldn't have to recognize someone for doing something they should do, but I'll sure as a heck correct them when they don't. See the lopsidedness? Like, I'm okay with jumping on someone when they do something wrong, but you want me to recognize them for doing something that they should do? Try that out in your marriage and see how it goes. I'm not going to recognize my wife for doing anything. When she screws up, I'll let her know about it, though. You can count on that. And you're like, dude, your model is flawed. How is it flawed? Well, science would say it's flawed, and you can play it out and still think you're justified. But science will say, no, that's destined for an unhealthy relationship. Non-contingent positive interactions, contingent. Then we're trying to prevent. So now a behavior's happened that we feel like we need to react to, but if you don't react to it skillfully, you could potentially harm a relationship you've worked on building. How many of you have ever, in any form of relationship, reacted to someone in a way that wasn't very helpful? Sometimes it's called stonewalling, where you just put up a barrier and you ignore attempts. You just like cut them off. I'm done with you because of the behavior. Like, that's going to be helpful in the long run. In the short term, it might work, but in the long run. So instead, we say, okay, even if there's a behavior, how do you, one, hold the person accountable or correct it or get it back on, or share your perspective, but preserve the relationship with the person while you're doing it? That's what we're talking about here. How do you preserve the relationship, yet hold someone accountable, a student accountable for their behavior? What would that look and sound like to accomplish both? Because some people think they're like diametrically opposed. You got to choose one. I mean, I'm on the hold them accountable camp because I'm not on the preserve relationship. And then someone's saying, well, I'm all about relationship, and then they don't hold people accountable. What would it look and sound like to do both at the same time in order to prevent negative interactions, but you're also getting behavior back on track? Talk. What would it look like to do both at once? And sound like? All right, how many of you realize in between someone else's unwanted behavior, so we're all individuals, right? And we perceive things. Someone else's unwanted behavior is a stimulus. And if it's an unwanted behavior, it's a behavior we don't like, or it's something that someone says that we don't like. Okay? That's a stimulus. Then stimulus response. Response. How many of you realize that your response sometimes is not really a regulated response, a well-regulated? Have you ever, like, what starts to get conjured up is emotional stuff going on? You really feel like you got to say something. There's a degree of impulsiveness that actually leads to a negative interaction, doesn't prevent it. I say that because this is where self-regulation for students, with SEL, we're trying to teach them, delay the time between a stimulus happening, being able to gain emotional control, and then engaging in a skillful response instead of an impulsive response. And then adults, we got to model this. That is SEL. And then if we make a mistake, we got to be willing to say, hey, your behavior is still one thing, but one thing that happened, I got a little too loud and charged around the behavior. You're not letting the kid get off the hook, per se, but you're also saying, look, I have a chance to actually try to keep my cool a little bit better. And it's something I struggle with and I'm working on. I'm going to try to do better next time. How many think that would go a long way with a secondary age kid? Versus an adult who acts like they make no mistakes and they're purely justified in their anger response. But then when a student acts angry and acts impulsively, we're like, hey, chill out, man. What the heck's going on? Chill out. It's like, oh my, why aren't you chilling out? My daughter's really professional at pointing that out to me. I was like, oh, look at you. Look at you. Uh-oh. I'm not letting her get away with the behavior, though. I'm not thinking, okay, now just don't have any, like, boundaries of your behavior. No. But I am going to say, look, wow. I'm sorry for that. Here's what I was trying to really say. This instead of this. Here's what I think we can work on to improve. It's the behavior, and here's why it's not helpful. And when you feel like there's a good time to think this through, I would love to collaborate to figure out a better plan that works. And if the behavior was big enough, there's going to be a disciplinary consequence. There's going to be a lot. We're not letting people just get away with stuff. Because there are consequences to choices. And we're trying to teach that right now when you're in this developmental phase, even if it's adolescence. It takes that much time for the brain to kind of come online. Why do you think we see biggest risk-taking behavior between 15 and 25? The brain still doesn't really weigh consequences and future-orient it that well until the frontal lobe's fully intact. This is a developmental process we're trying to scaffold versus they should know better. So, what would it look and sound like to try to prevent? Like, there's the behavior, you definitely want to correct it. It's a behavior that, imagine it's the behavior of your pet peeve and you really don't like it. But you've invested a lot of energy in trying to build a relationship with the person. How should you react? What would it look and sound like? How many of you think about the non-example? What wouldn't it sound like? But sometimes it's the things we try to avoid that give us the parameters. Like avoid X. Things that aren't X are actually it. If whatever it looks like doesn't come as clear as what it doesn't look like. It probably doesn't look like a public interaction. There's probably not just immediate jump to the warning or threat doesn't come first. So we could start to say, like, okay, then the communication isn't something public on display for everybody to look at like a fishbowl and look into it and go, oh, look at what's happening. It probably doesn't lead in with a threat or a warning. There's some other thing that precedes that and then gets to warning of a consequence based on the choices that get made following suit. So what are some concrete ways to positively, contingently, and non-contingently interact with kids? I want you to see if you can generate a list. So non-contingent, meaning it's not contingent on behavior, something they did for you, something that they said in the past or previously. What are some non-contingent ways to engage in positive interactions? I want you to see what you can come up with a list. What are some ways in which we can contingently positively interact with students? Meaning now they've done stuff, they've put in energy and effort to exhibit certain behaviors, stick with something, make a contribution, go above and beyond in some way. What are positive ways in which we can engage in ways in which we can engage in contingent positive interaction? Just want to see what you can come up with. So create 2 lists in your group, see how many different things you can come up with. Moving on. We're going to focus on restore now. Okay, you did your best. Imagine you had a relationship with a person. You did your best to prevent it, but nonetheless a negative interaction. You held the person accountable. They didn't like it. Have you ever had that? It's like, well, you handled yourself skillfully. There's still an element of accountability you're sticking with, and then the person doesn't like it. Now I'm aware of, like, I need to fix it because they're associating me with that. And it can harm things. So I need to fix it. Or, if you're in establishment phase, you never wear in, maintain. So I look at restore, it's not really restore because restore implies that you had a healthy relationship there. You can't restore something that you never had. So I look at these restore as, in certain cases with kids we've never established a relationship with, they are actually established practices. They're just following an incident of a negative interaction, and we're being intentional about following up with the kid. Because you can't restore something you never had. Like, I'm going to reinvigorate this relationship I've never had. It doesn't work like that. You're still establishing. And so you look at, this is just an opportunity on the back end of a negative interaction to try to establish a relationship. So there's categories of practices, and we're going to go through these. And I want you to, we have scenarios that are going to be in your agenda where there's high school and middle school examples. Give us a little room. We've come up with scenarios that we try, the ones like a tech situation, and you had to manage technology, and you know the person wasn't having it, and nonetheless now they kind of think they're not giving you any indication, they're less engaged. There's scenarios. I want you to think through, how would you respond and engage in a restorative interaction with the person? All of these you have to make your own and have to authentically sound like you. That's why there's no script. You can't sound fake, like you've read it somewhere. Or you can't come out like, I'm just being made to do this crap. And the student knows, oh yeah, the principal's kind of making you do this, huh? And you're just like, they could tell you're just going, no, this has to be like, in you and how you speak. What would it sound like to have a letting go conversation? A letting go conversation is one in which you're basically going to say previous behavior you're letting go. You're not going to hold a grudge. You're not going to bring up old dirt. You're not going to hold something against them. That we have a fresh start. And there's been plenty of situations in which you've needed fresh starts because you've done things in the past, and you wouldn't want someone for the rest of your life to continue to hold you to that and bring up old dirt on you. Have you done things in the past that were unskillful? Do you want people to continue to bring those? Is that healthy for a relationship to keep bringing up old past events? Is that going to be helpful in the long run? So, this is our chance to do that in words that, in how you sound. Taking ownership. Secondary students love this one. They love it. They're just dying for an adult to act like they're not holier than thou. And recognize something differently maybe they could have handled or done differently given the interaction. But this isn't saying, it doesn't say take full ownership. Because the kid's behavior, imagine the kid still told you to F off. You're not saying, hey, I take full responsibility for you just dropping a massive F-bomb in my face and disrupting the classroom. That's all on me. No, the kid still made a choice, right, in response, but maybe there was something that you added that escalated things to the point at which the kid, they don't have much other. They look in their toolkit, they're missing some problem-solving strategies in there on how to skillfully communicate. So what would it sound like for you to take ownership after the fact and communicate that to the student in a way where they aren't feeling like they're solely at blame? What does it look like when one partner in an interaction feels like the other one's trying to put all the blame on them? Does the other person become highly defensive? That's not what we want. We want to allay the defenses. We want to recognize the role that two parties played in an interaction. We're going to take ownership for our part, and then we're going to explore ways to make situations better moving forward. Mutual problem solving. This is where we're just sitting down with a kid. This is, I don't know if, anybody see the document? It's called like Lost Children. Anybody? So it's a documentary. This is the methodology from Ross Green called collaborative problem solving. It's a methodology that you use when you sit down, something's not working, there's a difficulty. And there's actually a dilemma. The dilemma is when you have a problem between two people, something's not working for one person and something's not working for the other person. And so you're bringing that dilemma to light, but you're engaging in a conversation and you're just saying, hey, what went down? Can we agree it's just not working? Something's not working for you, something's not working for me. So what's up from here? I want to understand what's up and what's not working. Help me understand. If the student doesn't clearly articulate that, that's when you get the permission to guess. You're not telling them, like, here's how you must be feeling. You're going to say, based on how things are going. So first you ask an open-ended question. And we have this is what the interaction was. You'd ask them an open question. What's going on? How many of you can imagine a kid saying, nothing? Nothing. You know, like seriously, what's going on? Nothing. So now, they didn't give you their perspective, you're going to guess their perspective. Then you're going to share your perspective. Here's why it's challenging for me. That's our dilemma. We now need to collaborate in figuring out a solution to that. I'm definitely interested in hearing your ideas and your solutions. If the student doesn't have any, then you suggest stuff. And you're coming up with a plan together. What that means is I actually value your perspective. I'm actually seeking your perspective and trying to understand it. And then I'm collaborating with you versus dictating something to you. Statement of care. We discussed this one last time. How many of you have ever done something rude? Raise your hand if you've been rude before. Would you say, like when you describe yourself to others, I'm inherently a rude person? That defines, like, essentially who I am. I function in the world as rudeness in human flesh. That characterizes my core humanity. Thank you. Because you've engaged in a rude behavior, does that define who you are fundamentally as a human being? So what we do in a statement of care is we take the student's behavior and we separate it from their humanity because they actually are a person. They aren't. This is just a disrespectful kid. This is a bad kid. No, what we say is your behaviors are one thing, you as a person are something else. We use these strategies when we think the student thinks we don't care about them because of their behavior anymore. That they're expendable. They're picking up on cues that you've just kind of given up on. Do you think kids can pick up on those cues? How about kids who are used to adults doing that in their lives, and they're just waiting for you to replicate the same thing? So here it comes. Ah, here it is. Yep, there it is. Got it. You really don't care about me. I knew it. Have you ever seen a kid test the limits like that? Particularly kids who maybe outside of school have had rough circumstances with their caregivers. So statement of care is where you've got to separate the behavior. Remember, you would want the same thing done to you based on behaviors you've engaged in. How many of you, at some point, you didn't try as hard as you could have in something you've done? Was there ever a moment where you didn't try as hard as you could have? Like it's a certain day. Would you want someone to then say, oh, you're a lazy person? Lazy and unmotivated because of your behavior. So this is separating the behavior and saying, that's one thing, we got to come up with a plan, but you as a person, here's what I think. How do you know when to do this? Well, we need to pick up on opportunities when there's a need to restore. There's a change in behavior. Emphasize change. If the kid never made eye contact with you and they're not now, that's not a change in behavior. It's a change. They did make eye contact with you, now you're not. They're not. How many of you, if you're having a relational problem with someone else, you have a hard time kind of looking at them, eye to eye? You feel something and it's just like, yeah, there's something going on. You're going to pick it up in terms of people's behavior. If you can pay close enough attention, you would say, there's something going on I need to fix. Your internal feelings about the other person is probably a good cue you need to restore. Or following an objective negative interaction. 10 out of 10 people would say that's a negative interaction. You probably want to follow up on that and have a skillful communication. So what do? It's this 4-step process: reconnect and repair in order to restore, identify when it's needed, find a natural opportunity, communicate skillfully, observe to examine whether skillful communication worked. You cannot put a timeline on repair or restore. How many of you have seen this one play out? Someone offers an apology, the other person's not ready to get over it, and then the other person gets upset. Like you realize, oh, I could have handled the situation better myself, I'm sorry for that, and then you say, are we all good? And the other person's like, oh no, I'm still taking it, I'm still processing. And then you go, oh, see, that's a freaking problem with you. That's exactly the issue. You freaking can't get over stuff. Oh my God. And you just use it to kind of pound back down the relationship. You can't, when you do a restorative conversation, you can't make the person just reinvigorate. What you can do is try to influence them. It's again, we're trying to influence through our interactions. You will observe their behavior to see if you've been successful. If you didn't impact them, you're still in restorative. So here's what I want you to do. You have a document. It says, I think high school examples, but there's high school and middle school in there. I want you to go through those scenarios. I want you to select one of these based on the scenario that you think would be the most skillful one. And usually we try to connect the technique we use to what's going on, what we're hypothesizing is going on with the kid. And there's not a perfect model to do this, but we're trying to match maybe the technique and how we're going to interact with them and communicate with them based on where we think they're at. So I want you to take those and kind of go through the motions. Can you access those? Can you see them in your agenda? All right, so give it a rip. Read the scenario with someone, select what you think is the most effective restorative communication strategy, and play it out in your own language.
That's nice.
Yeah. All right. If you can hear me, raise your hand. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. We're reaching time here. I did want to just squeeze in something and set this up because there's going to be additional continued learning around SEL. Again, it's us behaving within the same amount of time. We're trying to exhibit the behaviors that create very enriching experiences for kids that enable them to change, develop, and grow, acquire certain competencies that ultimately set them up when they transition into post-secondary education world. As adults, they can plug into work life, they can plug into civic aspects of life, and those skill sets will enable them to build healthy private aspects of their life. So what are we doing? SEL in some way blows up our conceptualization of teaching and learning. It's not just academics that sets people up for success in life. It's starting to turn teaching and learning as traditionally conceptualized as the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that enable people to fully acquire the competencies that allow them to plug into work, civic, and private aspects of life. And SEL is in that spirit. This is about curriculum and instruction. This is about keeping it alive beyond lessons, too. What we're cultivating here is social-related skills to build healthy relationships, to be more aware and understanding of others, to be able to manage self more effectively by regulating emotions, better monitoring behavior, being more goal-oriented and future-oriented in pursuits. Because when does that stuff get in? It isn't intentionally often, and that's why this brings kind of an intentionality. We're going to try to fit this in. Often we have to figure out master scheduling. When are we going to do this stuff? What is it going to look like after we deliver a lesson? How are we going to follow that up? What are other things we have to figure out that actually take into account that we're trying to cultivate kids' use of emotion regulation skills so they can better manage self in the face of adversity? Because that's the whole goal, is to develop resilient, self-sufficient humans. So we know the data are here. I want to kind of speed through and get you to the punchline. I'm sorry for this. That's dog poop. I'll take you through this real quick. How many of you like stepping in dog poop? Anybody just really like it? When it happens, you're like, yes. All right. How many of you are just like, are you kidding me? You're like a little bit of an anger response, like, especially when it's not your dog. These people just know. But imagine, same situations. When situations happen, people have thoughts and feelings that come up, and it impacts their behavior. So imagine a typical response. A kid's coming to school, steps in dog poop, and the kid says, darn it, I stepped in dog poop, I better clean it off so I can go to school. Is that a normal response? Do you think there's a lot of emotional dysregulation, like, I'm going to avoid going to school? So imagine a kid who's more depressive. Steps in dog poop, of course, I step in dog crap. How symbolic, I can't do anything right. I am a piece of crap. How do you think they're going to feel emotionally? If they go into school, they're more likely to disengage or fully participate in school. It's called the negative confirmation bias. People who have depressive tendencies pay attention to things that just confirm how bad they are, their world is, and they fail to identify the positive things. It's a thinking pattern error, and it's an emotion regulation issue that leads to behavior. What are we doing to help kids develop more hopeful, optimistic ways of thinking about self, their future in the world, and giving them the emotion regulation skills that are necessary? So this is at Tier 1, we have SEL curriculum. It's a light touch dose of this. Then you have kids in your system who actually need clinical intervention, and that's school mental health interventions. An anxious kid. Oh my gosh, this is horrible, I can't go to school. Everyone will call me stinky dog poop boy. Imagine a real anxious kid, though, thinks others are going to smell it. Might they avoid something? Same response, different ways of thinking and emotionally reacting leads to different behavior. How about an aggressive kid? It's called the hostile attribution bias. Blankety blank dog, you can fill in your choice words. I bet the owner made the dog poop here on purpose. If I saw the owner, I'd kick his butt. What if the owner was an aggressive person was out there? Do you think we'd have a fight? It's called a hostile attribution bias. Some kids' anger response is boom, boom, and they will crap on their relationships. They'll do anything when they get upset. They can't manage their anger response. In the gene pool, there's a lot of us in this room that struggle with our anger response. In this room, in the gene pool, there's a lot of us who struggle with anxiety, and it's gotten the best of us. So it's in building emotional capacity. We can manage these situations. Mine personally, if you want to know, is anger. When things happen, I start going. And it's like, oh, okay, you want to go there? All right, let's do this. Okay. It's not good. You got to manage it. Child with ADHD. Something felt squishy over there. Here's the deal. ADHD is not an emotional response. It's a self-management. It doesn't mean a kid with attentional issues doesn't have also emotional stuff, but the emotion regulation piece is kind of different, as well as the self-management piece. That would be more executive functioning stuff. SEL also focuses on executive functioning, that manage impulses, manage and be more organized, and being able to, not just start things, but complete things. That fits within the realm of SEL. Emotion regulation skills, executive functioning skills, and relationship and social skills. Combined, those skill sets are the best predictors of life success. Not test scores, not any academic knowledge. Those are the best predictors of life success. That's why we're at the point to figure out how do we start to incrementally put this in place in our school settings. We're not saying have the pendulum swing all the way back where we decrease academic rigor, we don't care about, no, we're not saying that, but we're trying to find where do we fit this in? And how do we do so in an incremental fashion without overwhelming the adults? Thank you for your attention. I wish you all the best, and I can't wait to be with you all again in the future. Have a good one.
Thank you, everybody. I think you have about an hour for lunch here, and then make your way back to your buildings. Be sure to fill out your survey at the bottom of the agenda. Have a good Friday.
Oh, this is your phone if you want that.
I'd find you.
Huh?
I'd find you somehow through Snapchat, I guess.
Then you'd never find me.